The way in which a documentary is structured can have a major impact on the effect it has on its audience. Filmmakers hold the power to scare, inspire, or anger their audiences, even make them laugh. In the case of many documentaries, such as the two I'm going to be looking at in this essay, the filmmakers behind them may aim to provoke a response from their audiences, whether this is evoking strong emotions or inspiring social action. As filmmaker Fernando Solana said, "We realised the important thing was not the film itself, but that which the film provoked." The two films I have chosen to look at are Frederick Wiseman's 1967 film Titicut Follies and the award-winning 2013 film Blackfish, which was directed by Gabriella Cowperthwaite. Both films provoked unique responses from their audiences, with Blackfish having such an impact on SeaWorld that the fallout from the film gained its own name, the Blackfish effect. I have chosen these two films as they each represent two very different styles of filmmaking and approaches to the genre of documentary, whilst both still having a significant societal impact. There are three key points which I think are important to discuss when looking at these films. What impact did the films have? What techniques did the filmmakers use that had such an impact? Why did these films have the impact that they did? The first film I want to look at is the older of the two, Wiseman's infamous Titicut Follies, one of his first films. A former lawyer and university professor, he had been appalled by the treatment of inmates at the Bridgewater State Prison when visiting with his students. In 1966, with the permission of prison officials who wanted to raise awareness of the poor conditions at the facility, Wiseman and camera operator John Marshall spent a month filming inside the prison. The footage they captured showed the abusive and inhumane treatment of prisoners by undertrained and unqualified staff. The film won various awards at international film festivals, but after lengthy court proceedings, was banned from release in the United States. Officially, this was because the court felt that the film violated the rights of the inmates. However, in a 2007 interview with Vice, Wiseman said that the state governor felt that his political career was going to be jeopardised by the movie, and that was why it was so heavily censored. It wasn't until the 90s that Titicut Follies was released for public viewing in the United States. According to the New England Historical Society, this was only after all the inmates featured in the film had passed away. Whilst there are a lot of changes which have been attributed to the film, it's hard to establish whether the institutional changes which happened after the release of Titicut Follies can be linked to the film or other external factors. However, on balance, it seems most likely that most of the changes I'm going to discuss were at least inspired by the bad press the film gave the prison. This article from the New England Historical Society lists a number of things which happened between the film's censorship and its eventual release to the American public. Notably, these include a 1968 study inspired by the film found that the courts had illegally imprisoned at least 30 inmates at the prison, including one man who had been incarcerated there since 1910, 48 years longer than his original 2-year sentence. The prison started contracts with a number of teaching hospitals in hopes of providing better medical treatment for inmates, though after the contracts had expired, treatment again deteriorated. The number of inmates was also decreased, falling from 900 to 300 prisoners. According to Mental Floss, Wiseman has also claimed that Bridgewater Prison started to use his film as a training aid for staff, showing how not to treat the inmates. It has also been argued that Titicut Follies may have influenced the closure of other similar institutions, though, as far as I'm aware, this has not been verified. Blackfish is very different in style to Titicut Follies, taking a more expository approach, with interviews being used to help push the film's narrative forward. The film's subject, whilst in some cases equally as grim, is far less controversial. Blackfish is an expose of the US theme park chain SeaWorld and its abuses and mistreatment of the animals at its parks. The film centres around the story of Titicut, an orca responsible for the deaths and maiming of a number of the park's employees. The response to the film caused a major PR problem for SeaWorld, with boycotts of its parks, a drop in its stock prices, and new laws being introduced which effectively outlawed many of the company's practices. This fallout eventually gained the name the Blackfish effect. In contrast to Follies, the impact of Blackfish has been rather well documented and researched, with a number of academic papers written on the topic. This includes a paper on the Blackfish effect. Included in this paper is a timeline of events which occurred after the film's release. As you can see, the film resulted in somewhat of a fall from grace for SeaWorld. Within a year of Blackfish's release, Southwest Airlines ended their long-standing relationship with the park. 2 years later, the federal orca bill was introduced, and at the same time, SeaWorld was forced to phase out its orca shows. On top of this, a number of high-profile musicians, including Hart, Willie Nelson and the Bare Naked Ladies, cancelled concerts at SeaWorld venues, National Geographic reported. In addition, SeaWorld's stock price fell by 60% following the release of Blackfish, as can be seen in this article from the Washington Post. With the impact of the two films established, it's important to look at the reason why these films had such an impact in the first place. What was it about them that inspired such dramatic changes? One interesting point about Follies is that it has no voiceover, narration or interviews in the film. Instead, it relies on careful editing to tell its story. This is what Bill Nichols might describe as being an observational documentary or direct cinema, where the filmmakers simply let the action unfold with as little interference as possible. Art and popular culture suggest that direct cinema emerged from a desire to compare common opinion with reality. It attempted to show how things really were, outside of the studio, far from the editorial control of the establishment. One of the first things which stood out to me when watching the film was the way in which it was edited. By far the best example of this is this scene here, which shows an inmate being force-fed. Contrasting this in some kind of twisted montage sequence, we see the same inmate laid out in a morgue, a mortician preparing his body for burial. Due to the mix of close-up shots, it's not clear at first that it's the same inmate in both clips, leading to a rather disturbing revelation for the viewer. It's this sort of imagery which I think caused Titicut Follies to have such an impact on its release. The length of cuts within the film is also worth mentioning. Many of the shots are left to play out, like the ones you see here, following the film's observation and direct cinema style. In a similar vein, Wiseman doesn't cut away when it becomes uncomfortable, leaving the audience to be confronted by some quite distressing scenes. Titicut Follies is quite unique in this way, with most modern documentaries following a similar format to that of Blackfish, containing interviews or interaction from a presenter, a style Bill Nichols refers to as participatory films, an example of which would be Louis Theroux's series Weird Weekends. This direct cinema style is likely key to Follies' success. Over its 84-minute runtime, the audience find themselves a fly on the wall, witnessing the abusive treatment of inmates in the prison. This is probably one of the reasons why the film has such an impact on those who watched it. These images may have challenged the audience's own preconceptions. However, without a narrator or interview, they are left to feel as if they have drawn their own conclusions, unlikely unaware of how carefully Wiseman constructed the sequences in his films. Despite the lack of obvious narrative in Titicut Follies, there are still characters of sorts which Wiseman follows. The main one of note is the prison doctor, who we saw force-feeding the starving inmate earlier. At another point in the film, we bear witness to this scene, in which the doctor is challenged by a seemingly sane inmate. The doctor's dismissive attitude to the inmate suggesting a lack of real care for his patients. It would seem that Wiseman uses this character as a vehicle to showcase the prison's complete disregard for those in its care. However, in presenting it in this way, the problem is personified and the audience are given someone to direct their anger towards. Blackfish differs in style quite dramatically from Titicut Follies. Instead of montages of clips, the film consists mostly of interviews and archive footage. This expository style relies more on the emotive themes of animal welfare to impact its audience. Like Titicut Follies though, Blackfish doesn't shy away from using shocking or distressing footage. This clip in particular is evidence of that, showing one orca maul and almost kill one of its trainers. This article from the Centre for Media and Social Impact discusses another reason why Blackfish might have had such an effect on its audience. Blackfish focused on a specific named living orca in captivity, Titicut, as the key character, a deliberate narrative choice made by the filmmaker, rather than leading with or heavily relying on statistics. By personifying the orca in question, Cowperthwaite put a face to the story, so to speak. Many of the interviews aided this, with experts and SeaWorld trainers discussing the orca's almost human intelligence. If audiences can relate to a story or character, then the film will have a far greater emotional impact on them. The same article also suggests another reason for the film's immense impact on SeaWorld, its indirect call to action. By naming SeaWorld and focusing on just one of its orcas, the audience had something to direct their anger towards. The film leaves no doubt in the audience's mind that what is happening is wrong and who is responsible. Had Blackfish not focused on Titicut or SeaWorld, then the audience's emotional response to the film would have been left undirected. This quote from Bill Nichols' book Introduction to Documentary sums up the effect both films had on their audiences. In both instances, the filmmakers claim that they never intended their films to have such a fallout. Instead, they made their films because they wanted to highlight something which they viewed as an injustice, rather than to provoke action against SeaWorld or Bridgewater Prison. In an article written for National Geographic, co-writer and producer of Blackfish, Tim Zimmerman, said, "When director Gabriella Cowperthwaite, with my help as an associate producer and co-writer, set out to make the documentary Blackfish, neither she nor I were setting out to change SeaWorld. Instead, we wanted to craft a factual, compelling film that tried to explain why SeaWorld's largest killer whale, Titicut, killed his highly experienced trainer, Dawn Brancho, in February 2010. Despite their many differences, both Titicut Follies and Blackfish had the same effect. They inspired change and led to positive action against the institutions they exposed. Whilst they varied to a great extent in their structure, content and style, there were some common factors which led to their success, namely their use of unsettling imagery and the personification of issues discussed in the films. From studying these films, it seems that there is no set formula to make an impactful documentary. Instead, filmmakers can call on a variety of techniques, or a combination of them, to provoke a genuine and proactive response from their audiences, even if this impact is not always intended.